Good afternoon, everyone. It is 4:30 p.m. Central Time. Welcome. It is office hours here on the ViaMonstra Academy. This is where you can learn about Intune, ConfigMgr, imaging, and anything in between. Today, we also have a very special guest joining us, but I will let him introduce himself in just a minute here. So first, let's get this show rolling. All right, we are back. I'm very proud of that little trailer. Hi, Frank. How are you?
Good. How are you doing?
Good. Thank you so much for joining. It's so nice to have an absolute legend in our industry joining. So, for those of you who haven't met you, Frank, would you like to introduce yourself a little bit?
Sure. So my name is Frank Rojas. I work at Microsoft. I'm currently a technical writer with Microsoft and mainly working on Autopilot documentation, but also working on the Windows deployment documentation that needs a lot of updating, but working on that section of the documentation too. So those are my two primary areas of responsibility. Just a little bit of history and background. My background. I started with imaging way back in the late 90s when I was a manager for a tech support department and in a bigger telecom company, and our department had special needs because our techs were so technical, and the images they used to give us were more meant for like normal call center employees, but we needed something a little bit more advanced. So that's when I started dipping my feet into imaging, and so I created custom images using Ghost and would deploy that to my technicians' computers. So that's when I first started getting into imaging. Move forward a few years, I was working for basically a resort company. I decided to get out of management, realized that wasn't my thing. My thing was much more the technical side of things. So I kind of reset my career at that point, and so I was actually a desktop deployment technician, where my responsibility was to actually deploy the PCs, physically deploy the PCs to end users. And so I would get the image that whoever created them would give me, and I hated the image because it never worked right. So I would get the image and then modify it to my needs, and then deploy it. So the image creation got moved over to at the time it was SMS. Got moved over to the SMS team, and they saw how I messed with the images all the time, and they were like, "Well, why don't you come and join our team and just create a good image to begin with?" So so I moved over to that team, and that was still the days of Ghost and stuff. And then this really cool new product came out called BDD, and so we switched over to BDD, started using that, and that's when I came across Johan's content for the first time, and started using a lot of his content to figure out things. And then BDD eventually became MDT. So so really got my hands dirty with image deployment in a large enterprise during those times. Right around the beginning of 2008, I moved over to Microsoft. I got hired by Microsoft to support SMS and the newly introduced ConfigMgr 2007 at the time. This was about 2 or 3 months after ConfigMgr 2007 came out, which is, of course, where OSD got introduced. And so when I came in, they were like, "Oh, you know MDT? Oh, you're our new OSD expert in ConfigMgr," because it was a new feature and nobody really knew it well yet. So yeah, I dove head in first, with OSD, realizing it was a lot like MDT, but also very different from MDT. So my first challenges in those days was kind of figuring out the difference between the two. And then just over time, became the OSD person, not only in my team, but globally in support, was kind of the go-to person for OSD and OSD escalations and just all the weirdest and strangest cases and stuff. So I did that for 14 years and really enjoyed the job and stuff. But getting up there in age, I wanted to kind of switch tracks to a little bit something less stressful, but still challenging. And so about a year ago, I was approached by Aaron Chakowski, who used to be the OSD PM, and who I worked very closely with for years. And so he had moved over to the documentation team, and he approached me and asked me, "Hey, we got this position. We need somebody to write Autopilot and other Windows deployment stuff. Are you interested?" So I was like, "Yeah." So after 14 years of doing support, I moved over to that position, and that's what I'm doing now. Um, so one of the reasons they kind of targeted me in coming over to this new team was they wanted somebody with a lot of background in deployment with ConfigMgr. Um, but at the time, I had very little knowledge of Autopilot. The most knowledge I had about Autopilot was basically what it involves with ConfigMgr, which is mainly the task sequences for existing devices, and that was basically my knowledge of Autopilot at the time. But they specifically wanted me to write new documentation because they wanted the new documentation to kind of be targeted to those admins that are coming from a ConfigMgr and MDT background and don't have much experience with Autopilot. So they kind of wanted the documentation to be written from that point of view. As a ConfigMgr admin, as an MDT admin, what do I need to do to get started with Autopilot? Um, so, I took on that challenge and I pretty much self-taught myself Autopilot. I won't say I'm an expert or a guru yet, but I sure have learned a lot in the last year. And so as part of that, I created a new set of docs that we introduced a little bit over a month ago, about 5 weeks now, which is basically a tutorial and walkthrough.
Can bring that up on screen real quick if you want. I
Yep. Yeah.
prepare that link. So here we are.
So you can see what we've created a new section. It's called tutorial. And again, a lot of this, what I wrote was, hey, when I started, what did I find? What problems were I finding in the existing documentation? What did I wish I had as a new Autopilot admin? So that's the kind of the approach I took. The existing documentation has a lot of information in there, but it's kind of all over the place, for lack of better words. It doesn't flow very good, especially as a new admin. If you just want to know, step by step what to do, there wasn't really a clear guide. So that's what this new documentation is. Some of the other feedback we got also was regarding, what's the differences between the different scenarios? What are the pros and cons between the different scenarios? Things like that. So we started off this new documentation with some tables listing that, and then we dive into the different scenarios. So with each scenario, what we did was the other problem I found in some of the existing documentation was that there was a lot of information in one page to try to consume. So one of the things we found in the documentation is when a piece of doc gets too long, then the readers tend not to follow it all. So if we made shorter, more compact pages, they would be easier to follow. So that's exactly what we did. So we did a step-by-step documentation of each step that you need to take to configure each one of the scenarios. And so you can see on the left-hand side there in the table of contents, you have each step. And so as you first, if you click on the first step, if you scroll down a little bit on that page, you'll see where it says next steps, scenario walkthroughs. Yeah, go ahead. So at the top of the page, we list all the different steps so that you have like a breadcrumb of being able to go between all the steps, besides what's listed on the left-hand side, and then we individually have a separate documentation page for each step, so that each page is much shorter and much easier to follow. So this is what I wish I had a year ago when I started with Autopilot, and so far the feedback I've gotten has been pretty good. Obviously, we're always looking for more feedback, and this is just the first phase one of our Autopilot documentation. We want to add a lot more documentation. Getting into deploying apps during Autopilot, configurations, policies, all the different things that you can do with Autopilot. So this is just like the first phase, but it does cover all the different phases, and I'm sorry, all the different scenarios, and how to configure each one. So sorry, I that got a little bit long there, but
No, heck no.
so,
This is good stuff. I'm obviously a bit biased, but I absolute love these scenario-driven type documentation, because Microsoft for years has always been really, really good at providing like reference documentation.
yeah.
These are the 47 different ways you can do this, or 48 different ways you can do that, listing every different option, but not always listing, okay, I actually have this task ahead of me. What would be a good step of actions to do to achieve that? So
Right.
this is good. I love it. More of this. This is good.
So yeah, so you mentioned what some of the other things we're working on. I'm currently looking to possibly do some of the same things, but over on the deployment side, mainly with ConfigMgr, step by step for new OSs, and upgrading the in-place upgrades, the two different in-place upgrades, whether you do it with OS or feature updates. So I'm looking at possibly doing something similar over on that side too. So that's kind of the project I'm starting to work on now, in addition to expanding more of this Autopilot documentation.
So can I be allowed to put in a request?
Sure.
Back in I mean, I was reading your articles even back in the ConfigMgr 7 days, when you were in like full ahead as a support escalation engineer. You wrote all these troubleshooting articles. You did a troubleshooting article for Pixie that I probably read 35 times by now, but also other information. I remember when ADK 1607 needed some extra attention to behave.
Yeah.
I read your article on using DISM for driver injection, and actually turned out to be a feature in ConfigMgr
Yes.
based on that work. So that was cool to see. But what I always liked was these troubleshooting aspect and the flows behind it. It's almost, do you remember the super flows that used to exist for
Yes.
ConfigMgr
Yeah.
7? Stuff like that is where you can, okay, I'm about to do this, and then this is the flow of things will happen in, because I found that so valuable, knowing what's supposed to be happening. And I've seen that showing up in some of the documentation already on the ConfigMgr side. For example, the software update troubleshooting documentation, they have that exact in them, where you get this happen first, and then this would be the log file, and here's an example how it should be, and this maybe not how it shouldn't be, and stuff like that. So humble request. More of that
Sure.
as well.
So yeah, I completely agree with you. Those workflows, especially the ones that came out back with, like you said, ConfigMgr 2007, were great. They were great for in the support world, because when we get cases, especially for something maybe we hadn't really worked on before, you would look at those flows, and you could follow the flows, And the flows would also give you big hints as to, for example, what logs to look at. So I completely agree. I can say that there might be something like that in the works for the autopilot side. I'm not going to promise something, but hopefully we'll get something like that soon for the autopilot side. What the other thing I can say is normally, at least in my role now, our main concentration is documenting the product and its features. Again, for my team, we don't get too much into like troubleshooting documentation. Surprisingly, or not surprisingly, but we feel that CSS is, or customer support is normally the experts when it comes to troubleshooting. So they're sometimes better to writing those troubleshooting docs. The challenge there sometimes is for those guys to find the time to write some of those docs with all their casework that they have. Not saying that we can't do troubleshooting docs, just realize where we normally concentrate our efforts from my team. But definitely, I agree with you that those flows are very helpful. Those flows a lot of times have to just come from the product group. So whenever we can push them to provide us those flows, they definitely help. But as I said, hopefully we'll get something like that soon out of the autopilot side.
That sounds good. All right. Would it be all right if we answer a few questions?
Sure.
All right. So starting off, we got a hi and welcome everyone, and congratulations on 1,000 subscribers. Yep, we're super excited about that, and we hope to be able to make something to celebrate that in the next few weeks. I'll leave it with that. Let's see. What is the best way to ensure that the config manager cache folder, CCM cache, is cleaned up? There seem to be quite a different number of schools for that. First of all, the config manager client is designed to clean out the cache itself, and it's pretty much a first in, first out type concept. But I worked with a lot of customers where they actually want to do a little bit of surgical cleanup of the cache folder, especially before an upgrade or things like that, where say that if you're going from Windows 10 to Windows 11, there is rarely any need to keep old, for example, software update packages around in the CM client cache, since you're actually going to something very, very different. So what I have seen is basically organizations using PowerShell script to allow for a little bit of surgical cleanup. We have showcased a few of these throughout the office hours here. The most common example is from Gary Block, I think. They are using this to remove software updates out of the CM cache using the native SDK available. Let's see if I have that one available on one of my servers here. I usually keep it around. It is one of those cleanup sequences. Yeah, this one here, which is using just a PowerShell script. And I'm not exactly sure where I have that script, but I know how to search. So I'm going to do that. Is that a hint that I'm old when I still use search in a command prompt to find stuff? I just think it's nice and easy and quick. And anyhow, here is an example on how to do basically just deleting certain content packages or cache items. And these are all supported ways of doing things with it. If you just want to list item to do maybe a bit of reporting and figure things out, there are quite easy ways to do that. This one here we showed a few times, basically asking the same object, but instead of deleting things, we're just listing things. So if I run this on my command, it will show me what packages I currently have in my cache. There is a support tool where you can use to see the same information. It's been included with ConfigMgr since 1802, quite useful. But yeah, I hope that answered the questions. Any comment from you, Frank? I know you have been.
Yeah, no. So normally, yeah, config manager is supposed to, you know, clean that folder out automatically.
Yeah,
Or by that, what I mean is if you got new incoming, you know, downloaded packages that's filling up the cache, it's supposed to remove some of the old stuff out of there,
yeah,
unless you've told it to persist the content.
yeah,
Uh, but it should auto delete. Where you could get into problems is if you, especially with something like OSD, is if you've got some content that's bigger than the cache size, then that will cause problems. But it should auto clean itself.
indeed. One challenge I just want everybody knows is that the default cache size of 5 gigs is way too little to do
Yeah,
any type of imaging work. You need to bump it up to at least 20-25 gigs. And
right.
that's what we see most customers end up. They have that as a starting point, and then they,
I know we had a bug in Config Manager. This is a while back with the install application task, that if you had like a lot of multiple application tasks, well, the application task downloads to the Config Manager cache folder, not the task sequence cache folder. And so if you had enough content that it downloaded into that folder and it filled up, then the application task would fail. It wouldn't like realize, oh, I've already installed application 1, 2, and 3, so let me get rid of that content. No, it would just fail. But they did fix that bug a couple of versions back. So
yeah.
so that's the one area I've run into problems with the cache size. Um,
The moral of that story is to make sure you keep your config manager platform updated. Yep.
yeah.
Awesome. All right, let's see. There was a question from Siva coming in on YouTube. Let's see. I was more like a follow-up comment regarding the cache size there. In their environment, they have a 50 gig cache size. No, sorry. They have 50 gig set in the client settings, but it's only showing up as 20. That could be if a percentage is also set, because the client like picks the first threshold for it. So you always in client settings you always define either, no, not either, both a fixed limit or a percentage of the hard drive. What I have seen organizations doing, which I think is quite elegant, is that they also use configuration baselines to have a more dynamic sizing of the cache, where they're looking at stuff like what type of device is this, how much free space does it actually have, and they use that to determine the final size of the cache to make sure that they don't overload a system that is running low on disk and things like that, because that is even worse. Windows installation without space to do anything is not a happy Windows box at all. So I hope that answered that question. John had a comment. Ghosting was the bomb. Yep, cannot agree with you more than that. Fun fact, I actually had to whip out my ghost skills just a few years back. We were helping organizations that had been victim for a ransomware attack, and luckily a lot of their client machines had been turned off before the attack happened, but we didn't dare turn them on because we didn't kind of know what state they were in, if they already have been infected. So our goal was to use the opposite of a deployment. We booted up on a boot image that made a backup of all devices before we did anything else with them, just to have data if data was needed. And it turned out that we only needed 2 of those to go back to eventually, but we can open up that ghost image with Ghost Explorer and grab the content out of it, and everybody was happy.
You know, it's funny. I found this out not too long ago, maybe 2 or 3 years ago. There is I think it's a DISM and a WIM format that is actually a sector-based copy of the image instead of file-based copy. I've never used it. I've never seen anybody use it, but I came across some documentation that we actually do have something similar to Ghost, where you can create sector-based copies in WIM files. So just a little funny side note to that.
Yeah, I remember using DD back in the days.
Yeah.
A very small utility, but yeah, good stuff. All right, let's see what else. Welcome, Frank. Do you have any working examples of using a menu for unknown collection variables? I'm
So,
assuming this is for to prompt for them for use in OSD.
so I don't have any specific examples. One of the things in support is we used to always support out-of-box functionality. We would try not to get into customizations because that just leads you into a rabbit hole, right? So that's where we would send you over to Johan to help you. So, but what I can say, I mean, one very easy solution is if you set the variables on the collection, but leave them empty, then when the task sequence starts, it will prompt you for the values. Now, it doesn't force a user to put in values, and you can just dismiss it. But if you want something easy and quick, you could just using out-of-box functionality, you can use that. I have seen customers use their own things, and it can be very small and it can be very small in scripts that just prompt for the value and then set the variable in the background. So
Yeah, so this is an example of what Frank
yeah,
mentioned, where you add a variable but you don't provide a value, and then the client will actually stop and ask you for this. It's not the most beautiful UI, but it is a way to to simply ask for something that is fully supported in the built-in product. But other than that, in my days, I have written probably 20 different front ends for different customers. I know that Nikolai Anderson's front end is quite popular. Jason Sandy's front end is quite popular. The UI++ front end, but these are all like community-driven customizations or customer-driven customizations
the
that not part of the product, but they.
the one supported solution we do have is UDI, but that
Yeah.
might be overkill if you're just looking to do one or two variables.
Yeah, I mean, I have to say, when UDI came, it was a great addition. The downside is it haven't received much love lately. Hasn't
Yeah.
been updated.
Yeah, I always
So
found it was a great addition. It was a great product. The one thing was I thought that the the wizards to configure everything were a little bit confusing. So there was a steep learning curve to it, but yeah, it was a great product.
yeah, I mean, as long as you don't do any own pages or anything, I found that there was a designer that came with a platform. If I open up one of the config files here for UDI,
Mm.
these 11 ready-made panes, they work well, and you can decide which one to show, which one to hide, and you can even in between in a given page you can show or decide what to show. So sure that they still work, but again they haven't been updated in, I like to say, about 10 years, give or take.
Yeah,
But
yeah,
heck, imaging is old as well, so
yeah,
it still works. And this is kind of what I like about the ConfigMgr platform in general. It's fantastically open.
yeah.
And as far as I know, it's the only imaging solution that is actively being developed and supporting, for example, Windows 11.
Yeah.
Unless you've been hiding something under
Not that I
that
know
I
of.
haven't seen. I mean, there are some deployment solutions for Surface devices. It's a PowerShell script-driven library, but it's nothing like this. This is
Right.
currently the only platform that gets updates every, well, it's every two times per year now, but it used to be three.
Right.
All right, let's see what else we have coming in. I had one question that came in a little bit earlier. There was a gentleman asking, is there a way to install software in OSD before the machine is joined to the domain during the build process? They don't want to do a build and capture, but they still wanted to install some software after Windows is installed, but not yet joined to the domain. First question would be why, if you're joining the domain anyway, but the short answer is yes. ConfigMgr absolutely support imaging of workup devices because that's how you do build and capture image if you want to do that through ConfigMgr. I usually don't, but if you want to, it's fully supported scenario. And the only thing you would do is you would take that sequence and you would not do the last step. Where it removes the agent and just preps and capture the device. So as long as you have instructions in the setup config and setup Windows and config manager client step to tell the client where stuff is, like management points and whatnot, config manager will happily deploy the workgroup machines. And if you want to later, you can remove the agent, but otherwise you just leave it because you can continue to manage machines in a workgroup state.
Yeah, I agree. I don't know, this scenario sounds a little bit strange to me too, but yeah, you would basically, have it join a work group at the apply network settings task. And then at the setup Windows and config manager task, you would just need to make sure you specify the SMS MP parameter so that it knows what MP to find. It normally gets that from AD, but if you're not joining the PC to a domain, then it's not going to be able to get it from AD. So you have to specify the SMS MP parameter at the setup Windows and config manager task. And then after that, you can install as much software as you want. And then later on, if you do want to join the domain, then you would use the join domain or workgroup task to join it later.
All right, thank you. Let's see, there is another question regarding does the modern connected standby has any impact with Bitlocker encryption speed? We have same setting for laptops versus desktops for Intune as well as for Autopilot image PCs. Laptops gets encrypted quickly versus workstations where a Dell shop. I mean, the speed is going to depend a little bit on how much content you have on the device as well. But in general, I haven't noticed that these type of devices are particularly slower or faster than others. I mean, obviously, if it goes into sort of a standby state, it will effectively stop encrypting anything, but it should resume that when it comes out of that state again. There are options during imaging to make sure machines are switched into high performance mode, kind of preventing them from going to sleep during imaging. And that's any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I agree. So I forgot to mention my other claim to fame, because task sequences have the enable BitLocker task, then I became the BitLocker SME also, right? So when BitLocker management came out, they kind of handed that to me and said, okay, you're the SME in that now too. So yeah, BitLocker management was a big thing that I did in the last couple of years that I was in support. But yeah, there shouldn't be the only thing I can think of is if maybe you have different settings for one doing use space encryption versus the other one doing full disk space encryption. The full disk space encryption would obviously take much longer. But besides that, it should be more or less the same. Again, disk speeds and processor speeds affect that some, but it shouldn't be, a dramatic difference between the two.
I mean, indeed, that there is from a performance point of view, if you hope you guys don't, but if you still have mechanical disks out there, please throw them away. Use some sort of an SSD disk, and of course, if you can use an NVMe SSD, we are talking performance about 5, 6, up to 10 times, not percent, but times faster than a SATA SSD. It's just hardware has come such a long way, and that will make encryption go quick as well.
Yeah.
All right. Robert is asking on YouTube, can I use a separate drive on a DP for a Windows PE peer cache? Okay, so the peer caching functionality in ConfigMgr is using the ConfigMgr client cache as its own cache. And that one is by default in Windows CCM cache, and I don't know if there is any option to put that elsewhere. I wouldn't even try putting it elsewhere because that's where it's tested for initially. In terms of the distribution point, yes, you can absolutely have a DP running on a Windows 10 or Windows 11 client. And there is still this old legacy trick where you can put a tag file on the volume where you do not want to have the content library, and ConfigMgr will not put the content library there. I think I have one of those
It's
available,
I
maybe on
think
one of my
no SMS
DPs.
on drive.
Yes, that's the one. Let's
Yeah.
see if I have it on one of these. Yeah, this one here. I put it on the C drive because I did not want a distribution point to try to put the content library on the C drive. There are also options when you create a distribution point where you can give it a drive letter to be like the preferred, and then you can have a secondary as well. So that's something you can configure. But otherwise, you can just leave it automatic and add a file like this on any drive that you don't want it, and it's going to be spread over the remaining drives that you have on that machine. So a few different options there for peer cache in terms of content. So it can be definitely a separate volume for that, but not for the CM client cache, which is dealing with the client component of peer cache and the peer-to-peer part of peer cache. All right. Follow-up question from Matt from last week. Have you upgraded your ConfigMgr to 2303? If so, how will the new update format for Windows 11 help with upgrades and updates? One of your colleagues, Frank, actually wrote a really nice documentation piece. I believe we shared it last week. That was Stefan Roll from your European, from Germany. If you guys haven't seen that, because he made some updates to it recently after some feedback from the community. Let's try to see if I can find a here. Oh, that was the. Give me a moment. Don't remember everything. There we go. Gonna bring the screen up again. Or put it on the screen rather. So this post here takes you through the inners of the new unified update platform. I haven't had a chance to play around with this myself much yet, but this article here has been updated now multiple times and contains a good chunk of what's going on behind the scenes and how the new content that, even though it appeared to be a lot bigger than we were told, it is using hard links in the background to trick you to not use a lot of disk space for it. And the client is, of course, only going to download what it needs from this content. But this was a good read. This is pretty much like your older post, Frank, where you would identify something and then you would write a little piece that explained how it worked. And I thought nice that folks are stepping in to fill that out of just because they wanted to. I think that's cool.
Just a slight comment. A few years back, for whatever reason, internally in Microsoft, they decided to get rid of the personal blogs that we all had. both a good and bad thing. It was bad because people like me, that's how we would get the word out a lot. But it also solved the problem that we had some people blogging out there that probably shouldn't have been blogging and just giving out bad info. So it kind of cured that problem, but also prevented. So what we did is we shifted a lot of our content just to like the troubleshooting articles that I actually was talking about earlier. So we were still writing stuff. It just wasn't as apparent that I was the one writing it and stuff. So it interesting. We do still have some blog articles like we saw there, but those are a lot more controlled nowadays than they were in the past. In the past, there was a little bit more of the Wild West when it came to blog articles.
I hear you. I hear you.
They're more vetted nowadays, so which is again it's a good thing because you know that the information is more accurate.
Yeah, it's always that balance, getting something out sometimes in a timely fashion when there is an ongoing or something just released, and it will always take a little bit longer to create a document. It's just the nature of things. It has to be written, it has to be reviewed, and folks who haven't tried writing a longer piece, that they kind of, it's a lot of work. It goes a lot of hours into it, more than you would think.
Yeah, that autopilot. Just to give you an example, that autopilot documentation that I wrote. I mean, it's a good amount of content, and if you looked at it, you'd be like, oh, I could do that in a week or two. It took me 3 months to do that content. So yeah, it takes when you got to make sure it's accurate, and not only accurate technically, but also grammatically and all that. It takes a lot of work. It takes a lot of time to make good content.
Yeah, I remember first book we wrote, we had the idea that how hard can it be? Month, two, maybe. Yeah. Try 2 years.
Yeah.
It's like, okay. We improved over time, but good Lord, that was a lot of work.
Yeah, that's I think my in the last year becoming an official tech writer, I think that's been my greatest challenge, is properly estimating how long it takes to write some of this stuff. Again, when I had my blog posts, you type something up quick and throw it up, and it was just a blog post, right? But when you're putting stuff into the official documentation, you have to 100% make sure that it's correct and that it looks proper and grammatically it's proper. And even then, you don't catch everything. You get into that where you've read your own content 50 times and there could be a glaring mistake there and you just miss it because you're reading one thing in your head, but there's something else on the page. So it's always good to get a second set of eyes on it and stuff. But it's a lot of work. It's a lot of work to make sure that content is good.
I think there is a question for you coming in on YouTube here, and it's on the autopilot things. Can you make reset if power is lost and fresh start clearer in their concepts? Good Lord, I should have learned more English in my school years.
Can you make reset if power is lost and fresh start cleaner in their concept? So it's a little bit funny because when I was looking at the autopilot, so there's three different things. There's autopilot reset, there's normal reset, and then there's fresh start. So technically, on the autopilot side, the only part that's part of autopilot is the autopilot reset. The other two, the reset and fresh start, are part of Intune. Now, for those of you that don't know, Autopilot's actually not part of Intune. Autopilot is its own thing. It's its own separate feature outside of Intune, and you can use Autopilot with other third-party MDM solutions. But with that said, obviously Intune uses Autopilot. So even though you've got fresh start and reset, those are actually Intune features. They're not Autopilot features. The one that is the Autopilot feature is the Autopilot reset. Because I mainly have dealt with the Autopilot reset and not so much the reset or fresh start. I believe reset and fresh start are I believe reset just completely, wipes, or I won't say wipe, but just completely reinstalls the OS and gets rid of everything. Off the top of my head, I can't remember what the difference is between fresh start and reset. What I can say is what autopilot reset does is, and I really dove into this because I wanted to understand how autopilot reset worked, because I was like, okay, well, this isn't a reimage. We're not wiping the device and installing a new image or anything like that. So from a very high level, and this is, I'm not going to say this is exactly the technical way it works, but so that you kind of get a better understanding of it. It almost kind of works like an in-place upgrade, where we do like a Windows old folder and then completely reinstall Windows using the WinSX folder. We reinstall Windows using those files that are already present on the device, so you get like a fresh install of Windows. Well, now the difference with Autopilot Reset is that it retains some of the information. It does get rid of like the user profiles and things like that, but it does retain some of the things like the MDM enrollment, Wi-Fi profiles, a couple other things. I do list it in my doc. That was actually one of the feedbacks we got was, what is autopilot reset? What does it retain? And so I made sure I dug into that and put that information in the new docs. So that's the way autopilot reset differs from the other ones, that it does do a reset, but it does retain some of the information on the PC. So it's not completely 100% reset.
All right, thank you. And to there was a comment in that question also. Okay, what happens if power goes out? I mean, if you're lucky, the process will just resume when you power the machine back on again. But obviously, if you're unlucky, something could happen to the file system, and you end up in a machine that is not in a good state. And at that point, it's pretty much okay, fine, reimage the device then and be done with it. I did find a post that I stumbled across a few years back. A little bit have changed since, but this is one of the short summaries I found in between these different scenarios. If you haven't read this one, in addition, of course, to the documentation, I found this one valuable. And there are a few others like this. If you search, basically. Reset versus autopilot versus I lost the other one on my head right now, but these scenarios you find good information as well. All right, let's see. William is just giving you some kudos for the documentation being improved, so that is good to hear, and I agree.
So one quick comment in William's comment, he says, what makes IT Block so appealing are the screenshots along with the documentation. So that's one thing we really struggled with when we were coming up with this new documentation. When I first started, I was like, yeah, I'm going to throw all these screenshots in there so that people can easily follow it. And then as you start going into it, you kind of realize it's not as good of an idea as you thought it was. And here's the reasons why. When it comes to Intune, unlike ConfigMgr, ConfigMgr only changes twice a year. And even when it changes twice a year, the UI rarely ever changes, right? But when it comes to Intune, they are constantly moving things around. In going through the autopilot documentation, I've had to take down countless screenshots because the screenshots that were there were several years old, and it just didn't look like that anymore. So in that sense, it was making it more confusing, because it's telling users to go do this and look at the screenshot, and then you look at your actual UI and it's completely different. So it makes it more confusing. There's also a lot of difference between Windows on the OS side. There's a lot of difference between Windows 10 and Windows 11, especially in the autopilot experience. The screens look very different. A lot of the wording's very, very different. So ultimately, we decided not to go with screenshots in the documentation, even if we did screenshots, that were brand spanking new today. A year from now, they're not going to be new anymore, and things change. Changing text in documentation is very easy because it's basically a search and replace, and we're even looking at using AI tools nowadays to help us with some of that stuff. But when it comes to trying to find outdated screenshots, that's a lot more difficult. You also get into the problems with localization and different languages. A lot of our documentation gets auto-translated into other languages, but screenshots do not. So you'll have documentation in other languages with English screenshots. So there's a lot of problems when it comes to screenshots. With that said, one of the other things I'm currently working on is some video. Videos that we're working on to kind of show the autopilot experience. So obviously videos can also get outdated, but we felt if we were going to provide anything, it would probably be better to provide some videos than screenshots. So just a quick comment as to why you don't see the screenshots in the docs.
All right, perfect, makes sense. Let's see. There was a question coming in on installing the report servicing role when the SQL is remote. Is there extra permission needed because to basically allow users to read the reports? When you set up the reporting services role in ConfigMgr, you do have an option in that wizard to specify a service account for that role, and that is typically just a normal domain user that you then will be used when reports are being read and the contents being shown. So I can't think of any extra configurations that needs to be done for that piece, just because the SQL have to be remote other than the usual SPN records and whatnot. But yeah, I think that's it. Let's see. Have you come across an issue where you have machines running Windows 10 20H2 and you offer the 2022 H2 enablement package, but the device think is compliant that doesn't accept the package? We have a case open with Microsoft. I have not personally seen that. I've seen the enablement package being happily installed but not taking effect because prerequisites are missing. Like the servicing stack update was not added and the light CU was not added on the machine before the enablement package was installed. I've seen that happening. And you would expect the enablement packet to just blow up and say, hey, this is not okay, but it doesn't. It just goes through and it's like, okay, I did nothing. But you can usually find it in logs.
So obviously I've been out of support for a year now, but that was one of the big new hot things that we were getting a lot of cases on before I left was using feature updates and enablement packages, especially during a task sequence. What I can say is most of those cases that we got where it was not picking up the enablement package was because the device was not at the patch level that it needed to be to get the enablement package. So just kind of a quick explanation about the enablement package. Basically, all your cumulative updates are kind of slowly adding in some of the features for the next version of Windows. And then at a certain point, you have enough of that content to be able to upgrade. So the enablement package, if you've ever looked at it, it's actually fairly small. I think it's like 100 or 200K or something like that. And basically all that enablement package is it throws a switch and says, okay, enable all these features. So if you're not at that patch level that you've gotten all those updates, or as Johan mentioned, the servicing stacks and stuff like that, then the enablement package will come back as not applicable. So in that case, you would have to use something like the full feature pack instead of the enablement package.
All right, thank you. That was a question or a comment rather than other than thank you for someone that attended our session at MMS in May now in Minneapolis. It was the cloud imaging session that they liked. So thank you for that, much appreciated. And for those that didn't have a chance to go to MMS, can highly recommend to head over to Miami Beach in October, because there is a shorter version of the MS conference there, and we will repeat some of the sessions that was presented now in Minneapolis. If you couldn't get away to go to the one in Minneapolis, there is one in Miami coming up, and as far as I'm concerned, this is a downright great conference if you want to learn about Intune, ConfigMgr, imaging, PowerShell, data security. It's deep dive technical sessions. They are an hour 45 minutes long, plenty of time for Q&A, and it's basically like hanging around with friends and family for a few days. It's very casual, and people are very open or very willing to share their knowledge. That there's like no holding back on knowledge sharing. It's just, you will learn so much in just a few days. Your head will basically increase 3 times in size.
And Miami is my hometown where I grew up. So
There you go. Visit family and friends. That's that's good stuff. All right. So I just wanted to mention that one. All right. Let's see. What else? We are slow. We have time for one more question. Hi, gentlemen. When it comes to deploying Windows 11 via MDT, no config manager, how can we set the default taskbar in such a way that users can still customize it after the fact? Is it possible? First of all, I guess since first of all, Windows 11 is not fully supported by MDT. That I actually added that to the documentation recently. It just happens to work. So I've done a lot of imaging with Windows 11 with MDT, but it's not something that is being actively tested and supported by Microsoft at this point in time. ConfigMgr, as I mentioned earlier, is, as far as I know, the only supported platform to do Windows 11 imaging. That being said, Windows is still Windows, and customizations are still customizations. Windows care a little on which deployment platform that happened to install it. And there are, it's nothing in the unattended XML. I remember looking into that a while back. But there are some registry keys that control the behavior of the taskbar, and I'm pretty sure that can be scripted in. There is a policy for it as well, maybe not group policy, but at least a CSP for it. I would have to look into that. Another great resource, though, you have to excuse me, Frank, I don't remember the official documentation for it on the top of my head. But I do remember this gentleman, Jörgen Nilsson, has been blogging for years on ConfigMgr content. He's one of the Microsoft MVPs, and he's been writing a lot around Windows 11 customizations. So basically, if you search his blog for example, start menu or taskbar, that will be good articles related on how to do this. I may or may not be officially supported, but this is his findings. And he has the benefit it's working with. It's pretty cool, actually. Sweden, from obviously initially, and now I live in the US, but they have a nationwide ConfigMgr platform around, of course, all hospitals, or most of the hospitals. They managed somehow to agree on using the same type of standard on how they would do imaging. Where here in the US, it's very, very different, where basically each hospital feels to be like its own little island on how to do things. But they do that, and they do a lot of these customizations in there. and he's been allowed to share some of this information. So this is good stuff. But we are, we have probably 20 some more questions coming in. This might be a new record for us, but we are unfortunately out of time. I'm hoping we can bring the answered questions with us to next week, at least some of them. But Frank, thank you so much for joining.
Pleasure.
It's great to.
One of the things I miss the most from my support days is talking and directly helping customers. So it's always good to talk to them again. So.
That is awesome. Again, thank you for joining, and thank you everybody who's attending, and we hope to see you again next week. Bye for now.
Thank you. Bye-bye.